To give you an overview of the Charity Commission, there's quite a lot of information on this slide to go through with you. It's a non-ministerial government department, so we are part of central government, but being non-ministerial means that we don't have direct ministerial control in the decisions that we make about charities. We are accountable, obviously, to Parliament for the public money that we spend, but we're only accountable to the courts for the decisions that we make. We're a civil regulator, and what that means is that we are regulating charities and what they do against the civil law. If we come across a criminal aspect to what we're investigating or become aware of it, then we have to work in collaboration with the police because only they have the power to deal with the criminal aspect. We've been established for over 150 years, so we've always kind of been around. In the early days, I understand that the commissioners went round on horseback, but these days there's no horses part of the Charity Commission. We have three main roles. The first role is that we are the public registrar of charities. So all charities with an income of over £5,000, apart from a few special categories that I'll tell you a bit more about, they have to register with the Charity Commission. And later on in my talk, I'll show you a bit what that public register looks like, because that's something we've developed in recent years. We also provide a lot of advice and guidance to charities. We do that in two ways. The first way is through generic publications and guidance. All of that's available on our website. We also provide more generic guidance through a contact centre. On the flip side, we have bespoke advice. So if charities have a particular problem, they can write to us and seek input on what to do. And that means that perhaps they don't have to go to the cost of getting lawyers and accountants involved, although many of them do. I think our approach to advice and guidance is to be as enabling as possible. Maybe 10 years ago, the Charity Commission was seen as a bit of a fuddy-duddy organisation that said no a lot, and we really like to say yes now and try to do it in the most pragmatic way. I think there's a bit of debate in the sector about whether the regulator of charities should have the advice and guidance role. Some people feel that that is better placed in the sector, but I think that the approach that we take is that if we are expecting charities to work in quite a complex legal framework, it's only fair that we give them the tools and the advice and guidance to meet their obligations if we're also going to kind of pull them up on it when things go wrong. Because our third role is that investigations role and intervening to protect charity property when things have gone wrong. As I said, we're accountable to the courts for the decisions that we make. And since 2006, there has been a charity tribunal introduced, which will hear appeals from our decisions in the first instance. And this is supposed to be much more accessible to charities because the courts were seen as prohibitively expensive. So the idea is if people don't like our decisions, they can go along in person and put their case at the tribunal. Since the tribunal was established, there have only been about 4 cases, and although those cases have been very useful for the Charity Commission because we've got a lot of feedback from them about our regulation and maybe where we can improve things, I'm not sure how much it's working from an expense point of view, as most of those cases, 3 out of the 4, actually employed quite expensive lawyers to represent them. All organisations these days need a vision, mission and values, and the Charity Commission is no different. Those are ours on the slide. We see the overarching objective really about promoting and increasing public trust and confidence in charities. Since about 2005, the Commission has run a number of surveys in the general public just to see how charity is viewed by the public and how the regulation of charities is viewed by the public. And what those surveys tell us is that charities are trusted by the public much more than any other institution. So we see that it's very important that that's continued. A little confession, because this says it's from the UK perspective, but really now the legal position in the UK has changed a little bit. So the Scots have got their own charity regulator, which was established by legislation in 2005. The Scots have always had a different legal system, but previously their charity sector was regulated by the tax authorities. The Scots take a very similar approach to that of the Charity Commission in England and Wales. You know, we put a lot of resource in helping them set up, and we work very collaboratively together. We also think that there will be soon a Northern Ireland charity regulator. We expect that to be established in the next few months. And again, I think that will have quite a similar approach to the Charity Commission for England and Wales. I wanted to give you a bit more information about the sector that we're regulating so you can compare it with the sector you have here in Canada. We have over 180,000 registered charities, so that's all organisations with an income of over 5,000. There is also things called accepted and exempt charities. Accepted charities, they fall completely within our jurisdiction except for the fact that they don't have to register with us. These tend to be religious organisations, and it's a bit of a quirk of history. The exempt charities are organisations where they have a principal regulator, so it was felt unfair to give them two regulators, and they are things like universities, which have the Higher Education Funding Council, and the really large museums, which have the Department of Culture and Media Sport as their principal regulator. The 2006 legislation introduced a much more stringent requirement for those principal regulators to regulate on charity law principles. So the idea is that they will come to the Charity Commission for advice and guidance about how to do that. There have been some issues with exempt charities. A few years ago, the Tate Gallery started to have transactions between their trustee body, their board of directors, and the charity, and that was something that the Commission became involved with to highlight that they didn't have the power to do that, and to make sure that they knew what to do in the future to manage those conflicts of interest. I think what's also interesting about the sector, which a number of those statistics show, is the diversity. When you've got 66% of the income accounted for by 1% of charities. So that means that charities range from those charities around the kitchen table to huge, very, very professional organisations. And what that does tell us is that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to the regulation of charities. This shows the income, which has increased between 2007 and 2009. We're not sure how the economic situation is going to play out. There are reports that donations are down by about 11%, and that's including in large charities as well. So I think next year's figures on that will be really interesting. Lots of people are involved in charities, over 2 million volunteers. We've got nearly 900,000 people in trustee positions. Trustees are the people who control the management and administration of the charity. It's their board. And in the vast majority of those cases, those trustees are volunteers as well. There's great debate in the charitable sector back home about whether people who are on the board of charities should be paid or not for that role. The Charity Commission's view is that the voluntary principle is very much part of the ethos of the sector, and that's part of the reason that people trust charities so much. So we're quite keen to see the voluntary principle continue unless there is a good reason for charities to be trustees to be paid. They can be paid if they have authority to do so, but it's just not as usual as being a volunteer. A lot of people, perhaps maybe from the larger charities, consider that not paying people limits your pool, so you don't get the best people to be part of your board. But we just don't think that the evidence stacks that up at the moment. I think this slide's quite interesting. This is the charities that work internationally, the number of charities. And when I first saw this list, I was quite surprised how high the US is on that slide. And we think that many of those are religious organisations. So I've talked very much about public trust and confidence and why that's so important to charities and to us as the regulator. But we do recognise that the charitable sector is vulnerable in several ways. And when you look at that list, it's kind of clear that what makes charities great in terms of innovation and flexibility also mean that there is perhaps a vulnerability there. Things like that they can bring people together easily and they work in all parts of the world. So we've got to get that balance between making sure that there are appropriate safeguards in place, but not stifling the innovation and flexibility of the sector. I think traditionally people wanted a much lighter touch on regulation for charities. They don't want charities tied up in red tape. But this is where the kind of one-size-fits-all approach, doesn't fit all approach, kind of we try and do it in the way that we regulate rather than having standard rules. I think the Commission accepts that you cannot minimise risk to charities completely, because to do so would be counterproductive, because it would just be so stifling to the environment that charities work in. So the Commission's regulatory response, we have several strands to it. There's obviously the detection of abuse. We do proactive monitoring, serious incident reporting, which I'll talk a little bit more about. There's obviously the compliance, which disrupts and prevents non-compliance in charities. It's about raising awareness of the responsibilities of charities, and that's very much part of what this conference is about for charities in Canada. The Commission believes that your best defence to vulnerability is to have strong governance controls, strong financial controls, and a board of directors that are really on top of what they're doing. The Commission now collaborates much more, both within the UK, with other regulators that come into contact with charities, such as the tax authorities and the police, but also overseas as well. Since 2002, the Commission has had an international programme which is funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. We've worked with 40 countries, spreading practical ideas about the effective regulation of NGOs and providing technical assistance. So I remember right when the programme started, one of my legal colleagues went off to Ethiopia to try and help them write their legislation for charity regulation. We've also recently done much more about intelligence gathering and risk profiling, and we have a strategic profiling unit which looks in a much more strategic way at the risks that charities are facing, and their first projects are about fraud and radicalisation. The Commission, in its regulatory approach, tries to be a modern regulator, and the government have kind of set us the task of following the better regulation principles which are set out on the slide. So we need to put this into practice when we're regulating charities, and I'm going to explain a bit more in the next few slides about how we go about doing that. We have developed a risk and proportionality framework. I think risk and proportionality are real buzzwords within the Commission. We're a public authority, so we love our jargon. But what does that actually mean? Well, it's about when do we get involved with charities, and then if we do get involved, how do we get involved? So the Commission has recognised some of the key risks that charities face, and which we would consider so serious that we would always engage with that organisation. It's not rocket science. It's things like significant financial loss, serious harm to beneficiaries, especially vulnerable beneficiaries, threats to national security, including terrorism, criminal, illegal activity, or any issues that could damage the reputation of an individual charity or a class of charities. So really, it's going back to, anything that would damage the public trust and confidence in charities. And then it's about how do we get involved? And risk and proportionality is really where the one-size-doesn't-fit-all approach can come in, because in deciding what we're going to do about it, we need to ensure that what we do is evidence-based, it's fair, it takes into account the capacity of that charity to comply with what we're saying. And an important part of proportionality is that if we could intervene in a different way, which is less interfering but would achieve the same outcome, then that's what we should do. So it's about not using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Improving transparency. So if you click onto the Charity Commission's website and you want to look up a charity, this is the kind of information that you will see about that organisation. When I started at the Charity Commission maybe 6 years ago, if you went onto the public register pages of charities, they were pretty boring. They only had income and expenditure. They had maybe what the governing document was, whether it was a company or trust, not very much information at all. That's all changed now. As you can see, the information available on the public register, this is only one of the slides that people can get into, provides much more information. So although it's quite tiny on the slide, what this is showing is the breakdown where the charity got its income from in a pie chart, so it's more accessible. It also shows the breakdown of how the charity spent that money. If you click on other pages in the public register, we will show whether you're up to date with your filing duties. Charities have to file their accounts and annual returns with us. And if you're overdue, it will say how many days overdue you are from filing your meeting that requirement. And this is because, going back to that, we see governance and getting the basics right as so important. So we always encourage people, before they donate to a charity, to look them up on our pages. And really our advice is, if they're overdue on their accounts and things like that, think twice before you donate to them. We're developing this further, so there will be flags showing on the public register if we have opened an inquiry into you, or if we have appointed an interim manager. So people are they have full knowledge when they're donating to that charity as far as they can. Also, all the charities' public accounts, you can link through. So for the past 6 years, you can, from this register, open up the charities' accounts that they submitted with us. Another development that we've had in improving transparency is the serious incident reporting. So since 2007, there is a requirement on charities with an income of over £25,000 to declare to us in their annual return that there were no serious incidents happening in that year that they've not already told us about. It's good practice to report it to the Commission as soon as possible, because the sooner we know about it, then we can engage with the charity to provide advice and guidance. What is a serious incident? Well, it mirrors very much the risks that I identified before. So it's things like significant financial loss, criminality, abuse of vulnerable beneficiaries. And this shows what has been reported to us in the year 2008 to 9. There were 255 reports of serious incidents. Overwhelmingly, they were to do with the financial issues, fraud, theft, that kind of thing. But significant loss of funds, it might not be that there's been any fault. So, for example, if a charity has to abandon a significant amount of property because that where they're working has turned into a war zone, that would still be a serious incident because you've lost property, but it is obviously nobody's fault. We just want to know about that. And it's important, I think, that we do, because it's very much deepened our understanding of the charitable sector and what's going on. I think previously people thought that when they'd reported the matter to the police, job done, and they didn't also report it to us. But of course, we've got a different angle to it to the police, because our interest is making sure that the charity learns from that, for example, if it didn't have proper policies in place, there's an opportunity there for the trustees to get that right and to review the policy to make sure that the risk of it happening again in the future is minimised. Some developments for 2010. The Commission very much more moving on to online. Now people can register charities with us online. They can submit their accounts and annual returns. We also do quite a lot of fast-track queries online where people can apply for authority to sell land or to enter mortgages. We're doing more alerts and bulletins about key compliance messages. So, for example, the recent earthquake in Haiti, we became aware of scams where people were either setting up sham charities or cloning genuine charities' websites in order to encourage people to donate. And we were able to alert people to that on our website, and that's something that we'll be doing more in the future. We're also going to be further enhancing the public register to make sure that even more information is given out about charities, doing some subsector profiling to find out what the issues are, for example, for arts charities, as opposed to those charities working internationally, to really deepen our understanding of different sectors. And there's also going to be an online search facility for the register of removed trustees. So if somebody wants a trustee to join their board, it gives them an opportunity to do some due diligence on that person. So there's some of the developments we've got in mind for 2010. I hope that's been an useful overview for you about how we approach regulation in the UK.